Hello there, Ramblers, and welcome to another instalment of Rees Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming, and technology. I hope you're all doing well out there. Nice warm week here in the UK, not the stifling hot conditions that we had with the heatwave in the previous week, but apparently that is going to be coming back next week. So a bit of a brief reprieve from that, but I suppose it's all appreciated. As for me, I'm going to be heading down to London this weekend to see Alanis Morissette live, so that'll be quite exciting. And we've also just discovered that she's going to be supported by Skunk Anansie, another big name from the 90s, another band that was quite a big influence on me as well, one of those kind of post-grunge type things. And yeah, I've seen them. Obviously, they've played at Glastonbury a few times over the years, and I've seen them on the BBC's live streams of that, but never actually seen them in person. So looking forward to checking out those two at least, and also a nice weekend down in London. As for other happenings, I think we've had a Prime Minister resign or something. I'm sure I heard rumours about that, but yeah, as per usual, the debate has actually been about football this week and whether people should let their kids stay up until, what is it, like 5 o'clock in the morning to watch the England game on Monday. So that's that. But yeah, well outside of our usual remit. And speaking of things that are outside of our usual remit, but something that I do need to talk about because I do think this is quite important. There has been some quite concerning game preservation news this week, certainly stuff that kind of concerns the future of game preservation. Coming from the two big console manufacturers, and in Sony's case, not forgetting that Nintendo exists, of course, but yeah, I am referring to Sony and Microsoft here. But yeah, in Sony's case, they couldn't have timed this any worse because they had another parallel announcement, which kind of proves why this is not a good thing at all. So let's just jump straight into IGN just here before we, do any sponsor spots or anything else, because I just want to get this out of the way. So, yeah, PlayStation's physical media-free future isn't just concerning, it's offensive, reports Luke Riley over at IGN. You cannot trust digital purchases, and you cannot trust the corporations that offer them. Strong words, but perhaps justified in this case. PlayStation has suddenly told its audience to brace themselves for an entirely physical, media-free future. The news comes just days after the company unapologetically informed users it was about to permanently delete more than 550 Studio Canal distributed movies from the PlayStation Network and literally remove them from the accounts of any customer who previously purchased them. So, yeah, if you have purchased any of these 550 Studio Canal movies via the PlayStation Network, not only will you not be able to, will people not be able to buy these movies in future, but if you've already purchased them, you're going to lose access to them. You don't actually own them, and that's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, you could have gone out and bought the physical Blu-rays, and nobody can come and take that from you. As for me, I'm a big Jellyfin fan, I'm just saying. But anyway, it's honestly one of the most baffling corporate failures to read the room since Microsoft handed Don Matrick a microphone and allowed him to discuss how the Xbox One probably wasn't going to suit someone serving on a nuclear submarine. That is, PlayStation is following up a brazenly anti-consumer rug pull of digital content with fresh confirmation that all PlayStation content from 2028 onwards will be exclusively digital. The timing would be hilarious if it wasn't so appallingly offensive. So, yeah, the article does go into a bit more detail about that and a bit more of a very well-justified rant about digital distribution. And how if you don't own the physical disc, you don't own the game. Mind you, that's becoming less and less the case nowadays as well, isn't it? I mean, some games released on cartridge for the Switch, for example, don't actually contain the game. It basically just downloads the entire thing the first time you run it. And it's certainly not a new phenomenon in the console world. Of course, in the world of the PC, we have been pretty much entirely digital for quite a long time now. Got stuff like Steam and GOG and stuff like that. But I suppose the PC, by its very nature, means that you can kind of back those up and take copies. I know there is DRM on Steam, but certainly on GOG, you can stick that on your NAS or whatever, and you still have the files 10, 15, 20, 50 years, 100 years later if you still want access to them. But the consoles being the very kind of locked down, walled gardens that they are, very much rely on people kind of cracking them and circumventing the protection and using like piracy techniques to actually preserve those games. And they're going to become even more important now that this has been announced. Not to mention stuff like not being able to resell those games. And I believe it was also announced this week that GTA 6 wouldn't be having a physical disc release. There will be a physical release, which will come with a load of knickknacks and things, as you might expect. But it doesn't actually include the game on a physical disc. Sad times, I think, and quite a big turning point, and one that has been, unfortunately, quite a long time coming. Now, there has also been some speculation about Project Helix, Microsoft's upcoming console. We're still not quite sure what it is. I think there has been some kind of teaser that it's going to combine the worlds of Windows and console gaming into one combined ecosystem / device / whatever. I do all my Windows gaming on Bazzite nowadays, and obviously people are moving over to the Steam Deck and other kind of Linux-based solutions. So Windows is becoming less and less relevant, I think, in the world of gaming. But yeah, another story here from IGN, which I should also just mention before we move on. Xbox's new console, Project Helix, will reportedly not have a disk drive. Microsoft exploring ways to digitize physical games. So of course, the current generations of the consoles, there are versions with disk drives and versions without drives, entirely digital versions of those consoles. And Microsoft, and indeed it seems Sony, with their next generation of consoles, will not be offering a disk drive at all, even as an option. Whether you can buy games on USB stick, well, to be honest, I can't see that happening. So that's that. According to new reports, Xbox may be moving away from physical media with a console currently known as Project Helix. Windows Central revealed that its sources say that Project Helix, the next generation Xbox, will not feature a disk drive. No further details were provided, but the news came after PlayStation revealed it will no longer be producing or supporting physical game discs starting in January 2028. This suggests that the PlayStation 6 won't come with a disk drive and that Sony is planning to embrace an all-digital future. The Verge added onto the news cycle. I think this is quite an important side note as well, by reporting that Microsoft is exploring a new disk-to-digital feature. This would allow users to put a disc into their console and gain a digital license for the game, giving the ability to play it without a disc. If the owner gives the disc to someone else, that entitlement then transfers to the new player. This essentially means you can't resell or loan your physical copy to a friend if you want to keep the digital version. The discs will still work as normal if you choose not to digitize it. I have no idea how that workflow is actually going to work. Of course, again, just looking to Steam, we've had physical releases of games like, even going all the way back to like Half-Life 2 20 odd years ago. Where, of course, it includes the actual the CD, the so-called CD key, with the disc, as games did throughout the 90s and whatnot. But you can just type that straight into Steam and download the game and own it that way and, completely do away with the physical disc. But how that's going to work for pre-existing games that people already own and how they're going to tie it to the specific physical disc and stop people being able to resell them and lend them to people, I don't know. Sounds like a bit of a wet dream as far as the game developers and publishers are concerned, because obviously they can milk every single penny out of people and, kill off the second-hand market, which is something that they've been rubbing their hands together over for quite a few years now. Anyway, I think coming all the way back to our original point of game preservation, that just makes piracy and jailbreaking, cracking these consoles even more important, and it is a process that is getting more difficult as the console generations move on. And I do think that it makes the world of PC gaming perhaps more important. Of course, we've had the recent release of the Steam machine, the consoleization of PC gaming, and what exactly is the point of buying a console nowadays? You've got no freedom whatsoever. You've got no ownership of the actual games whatsoever. I think the one big selling point was that you could have the physical disc and that you could sell that and that you could, lend it to friends or whatever. And that was kind of a big advantage over kind of Steam and PC gaming. And now that's gone. So why tie yourself into a specific platform? Come over to the PC, build your own gaming PC or buy something off the shelf, stick Bazzite on it or a Casio OS or your Steam distribution of choice and enjoy the games that way. That's what I say. And And just before we jump into the rest of the stories for this week's Ramble, I'd just like to give a very quick shout out to our sponsor, PCBWay.com, who, of course, have been offering PCB fabrication services to the maker community at large for 11 plus years now, and have built up quite the reputation for excellent quality control, fast turnaround times, and very affordable pricing. But did you know that they also offer some additional services nowadays? Stuff including CNC machining, injection molding, 3D printing, and also sheet metal fabrication, to name but a few. A complete package for your next fabrication project, if you like. So if that is of interest to you, please do check out the link to PCBWay down in the description. And once more, a big thank you to PCBWay for all of your support for everything that I do here on YouTube, and also for the maker community at large. My first story this week was all about digital distribution, and quite rightly, I think, as part of that, Valve and their rather excellent Steam platform got a bit of a mention as a shining example of digital distribution done right. Of course, GOG has come along in the meantime and shown us that we don't need DRM to be able to sell games online and to actually make a profit from them. And perhaps that's something that, Valve and Steam should be a bit more on board with. But you know what? By and large, the frictionlessness of it, they're kind of quite consumer-friendly focus as well. They do tend to side with the actual buyers rather than doing horrible things like removing big chunks of people's games library with zero notice, as we've just seen with Sony. I know that was movies, but they're good guys. And I did mention as part of that story that my introduction to Steam was Half-Life 2 all those years ago. I remember buying it from a shop, PC World, in fact, if you must know, on release day, and taking it home and installing the DVD on our home PC at the time. And we were on dial-up. We had AOL 56K dial-up, and there was a day one patch that was something like 120 megabytes that was mandatory to actually play the game. And I actually ended up spending the entire day downloading that before I could even fire up Half-Life 2. Thankfully, things did improve from that point onwards. But yeah, other than that, I think from that point onwards, everything was pretty much entirely digital for me. And it seems, in the example of Half-Life 2, things have actually taken the next logical step, thanks to a fan project, which was posted over on my Discord server this week. Now, I will say I didn't use the link that was provided. The quality of the story was perfectly fine, and it's a site that I am familiar with. But having read through it, the author of said article was being a bit of an edgelord in the comments and leaving some quite snarky and not very pleasant replies to some of the people who'd read his article and commented on it. And I thought, you know what? That's not cool. So you're not going to get my business this week. Instead, we're going to go to tweaktown.com, who have also covered this, and as far as I know, haven't done anything to offend me in particular. I'm not even particularly familiar with this site, but there we go. Anyway, you can now play Half-Life 2 in your browser. I may be medicated for ADHD nowadays, but that doesn't mean that I don't go off on tangents still, occasionally. You've probably noticed that. You can now play Half-Life 2 in your browser. Valve's Half-Life 2 has been ported to a new platform, your web browser. Yes, the iconic shooter is now playable in a new browser tab, writes Costa Andridis over on tweaktown.com. Browser-based gaming has come a long way, especially in enabling access to classic games that were once standalone desktop or console experiences. For example, DOS Zone is a repository of classic PC games from the MS-DOS era, and its browser-based, ad-free way to play classics like Duke Nukem 3D, SimCity 2000, and Prince of Persia. And now we can add Valve's iconic Half-Life 2 to the list of classic games that are fully playable in a browser tab. And just to kind of diverge from the story here once more, anyone of my age who remembers just how groundbreaking Half-Life 2 was and the kind of beast of a PC that some of us were building at the time to be able to play this game, the fact that you can now just play it in a web browser is pretty mind-blowing for those of us in the audience who are old. Anyway, this has been developed by SLQNT, Sliquent. I don't know, and 98006. This web-based port of the game reportedly took 3 months to develop, but it offers the complete game to play with only a few graphical issues. The most notable one is the characters' eyes aren't rendered with irises or pupils, so they kind of look like zombies. Still, it's an impressive feat to get one of the most impressive games from the 2000s to run in a browser with all of the gameplay intact, and it's also a testament to just how far we've come, both hardware and internet-wise, where cutting-edge games from back in the day can be played in a browser without having to wait an hour or several hours for the game to download and install. Anyway, there's a link here to the website. It mentions that it has full mouse and keyboard controls, and the initial load can take quite a while depending on your connection. I did just try to load this. Has it loaded yet? No, it's still loading. My connection here at the studio is abysmal. Oh, he says, what's going on here? It's actually working. Start new game. Let's try that. We'll leave that doing its thing in the background and go back to Tweaktown. How exciting. Oh, it's got to download the map, the train station map. It's literally taken about half an hour just to get to this point. But still, that's probably more of a comment on the speed of my connection here than the technical prowess of the developers. It won't be long until you take control of Gordon Freeman as he enters City 17. Half-Life 2 campaign remains one of the most influential in PC gaming and FPS history, as it delivered a cinematic campaign full of action, stealth, puzzle solving, and innovative gameplay, thanks to its realistic use of physics and the introduction of the gravity gun. Of course, those physics puzzles, they were really groundbreaking at the time, weren't they? Any Half-Life story wouldn't be complete without mentioning Half-Life 3. As of 2026, there's still no signs of the game's existence, even though there have been several credible rumours that have pointed to its announcement coming late last year, with a release to coincide with the release of Valve's Steam machine. And I'm one of those people who was very excited about it and was kind of half expecting some kind of announcement around the release of the Steam machine, which, as I reported on last week, was released, at least in quite a limited fashion, thanks to the ongoing hardware shortages and whatnot. But anyway, this is a retro and vintage gaming leaning podcast, so I guess we'll look to the past and go back to Half-Life 2 in the browser. What's this? Perfect timing. We've got the intro here. slqnt.dev has control of your pointer. Okay, that's good. Is something going to happen? This is really exciting listening, isn't it? For those of you listening on the podcast platforms, driving or on the train or commuting or whatever. We've got G-Man here. He has pupils. He has irises. I don't know what that story was on about. Seems to be running at a reasonable frame rate. Of course, we've got this whole rendered in-engine intro to kick off the game. I think it's quite long. I don't know how much more I can talk. Anyway, if you want to check it out for yourself, the link is hl2.slqnt.dev, which of course will be linked down below in the description, along with all the other stories that I talk about in this week's Ramble. From what I've seen of the opening cinematic here, it looks like it's running rather well. I think we're about to take control of Gordon Freeman just before I sign off. We are in the train here, and I am walking around. Point insertion, of course, that's the first chapter of Half-Life 2. This looks pretty good, actually. It's running quite smoothly. The controls are very responsive. And yeah, it's Half-Life 2 running in a web browser. I don't know, crazy stuff. Another week, another Sega Mega Drive story. And why not? It's one of my favourite consoles of all time, one of my very first consoles, and one that still has a very active community around it. Of course, we've got hardware modifications for the original consoles. We've got flash drives. We've got a very vibrant homebrew community churning out all sorts of interesting new games and ports and hacks of old stuff, new versions, new takes on old formulas. We've got emulators on all sorts of different platforms, and we've also got the rather excellent Mr. Core for the Mega Drive consoles as well. Much loved and well-supported console. And so it kind of surprises me to see this news story this week, and the fact that this hasn't been done already. As far as I know, it hasn't, and that's not referenced in the story. So in lieu of doing any further investigation, we're going to take them at their word. Anyway, this also incorporates another of my favourite topics, which, no, it is not Doom this time around, but it's Linux. Porting Linux to all sorts of interesting and varied devices. Which does make me wonder, actually. Of course, we usually have a story about Doom being ported to some kind of weird and wonderful platform. Has Doom or Linux been ported to the most platforms? It's quite a tough one, isn't it? I'm going to say probably Linux. I mean, the requirements are a bit lower, and it is kind of more intended from the ground up to be kind of more multi-platform and port-friendly, I guess. Yeah, interesting topic. Anyway, let's get back onto the topic of the Mega Drive, and if you haven't worked this out already, this is a new distribution of Linux for the Sega Mega Drive, although I will ask you to temper your expectations because it doesn't really offer a huge amount of functionality as yet, as you might expect on such a limited machine. Doesn't make it any less of a technical triumph anyway. But yeah, Hackaday.com reports this story by Jenny List. It's Linux on a Sega Mega Drive. If you were in the market for a games console in 1990, the chances are that the object of your desire was either a Super Nintendo with its 16-bit 6502 derivative, or the Sega Mega Drive, sold as the Genesis in North America with its Motorola 68000. Of course, a CPU that also powered stuff like the original Apple Mac, stuff like the Neo Geo, and the Amiga and the Atari ST, to name but a few. So, yeah, iconic processor, if there is such a thing. Back to the story. Both machines featured impressive graphics and sound for their time, but they remain firmly in the 16-bit era, which makes it a surprise to see Linux MD. It's Linux for the Sega Mega Drive with the latest mainline kernel, which I think is quite an important distinction to make because the 68000 is supported as a CPU in Linux even today, and that's kind of what's made this possible with the very latest kernel. So the Motorola 68000 series of chips, continues the story, was the first porting target for Linux, and is still maintained in 2026. This build runs from an SD card in a modern Mega Drive storage peripheral and is reported to run on the original hardware. The lowly 68000 in the Sega doesn't have a memory management unit required for the full Linux experience, so what's really running here is a kernel compiled with the no MMU option. That in itself is a feat on this architecture. On it, you get small utils, which is apparently a cut-down version of core utils, and that seems to be it. So very, very basic command line functionality on here. We like this project for pushing both console and kernel to the limits, even though we see that maybe it's not the most practical Linux machine. Meanwhile, though, this isn't the only Unix-like OS for this console. And indeed, I did have to follow that link out of interest. Back in April 2025, there was a port of Fusix, which is another Unix-like operating system for the Sega Mega Drive, apparently. And at the time, it was just running on the Blast M emulator. And yeah, apparently it could support real hardware, but I don't think that had actually been tested at the time. But that also offered a shell that you could play with. And it mentions here that the console also has 64K of memory, which wasn't mentioned in that other story, but I think is quite important to note. So you're not going to get a full-blown desktop experience with either of these things, but that's not the point, is it? The point is the technical challenge. So if we head over to the GitHub page for Linux MD, this is Linux for the Sega Mega Drive. Is this a joke? No. What do I need? You need a Sega Mega Drive. Of course, you need a Mega EverDrive Core or Pro, which are, of course, the flash carts for the Mega Drive. It allows you to load games and things from SD card. A USB cable to transfer stuff between the EverDrive and the PC. And you need some time to burn, apparently. Will this work on an emulator? Probably not, because this uses the SSF2 mapper that gives us 4 megabytes of RAM on board the flash cart, the Mega EverDrive, as mentioned. And yeah, so that's quite an interesting use of that technology, isn't it? And also a QEMU fork that emulates enough of the Mega Drive and the EverDrive to play with this without the real hardware is included. So note that this doesn't really emulate the feel of the real thing. QEMU emulates the CPU way too fast. But yeah, at least it serves as kind of a development and tinkering type environment. We've got some build instructions, some boot instructions, and we also have a bit of a screenshot of this running, or at least instructions on how to start this from the EverDrive flash cart. So it's quite comprehensive. There we go. What's the point? Yeah, it's a fancy console using the Mega Drive's video output. It even has nice scrolling. Look at that chunky font and that lovely pixelated tux graphic at the top as well. I love that. Yeah, we've got a green box in the top right corner to show that the kernel is running, just in case you think it may have gotten stuck, so that's quite useful. And also a disk activity indicator. So yeah, it has some functionality to it. Completely useless, of course, for day-to-day use. You're not going to be using Linux on the Mega Drive as your daily driver for browsing the internet and all of that. But you know what? I'm glad that these projects exist, and it's really cool to see people pushing this old hardware to the limit. Goodness. Of course, Linux, I was going to say, was first released, I believe, in 1991, was kind of the first release of the very early version of the kernel by Linus Torvalds. So the Mega Drive actually predates that by a year. So, yeah, quite the technical achievement, and always cool to see. From Sega to Nintendo next, and indeed another one of my favourite consoles of all time. Another fascinating hacking project, but not in the realm of software this time around. We're not talking about porting Doom or Linux or what have you to some inappropriate aging Nintendo console. No, this is a hardware project, and more specifically, it's a re-implementation or a reimagining, a recreation, if you like, of a rather important console from the past. As mentioned, from Nintendo. And I actually learnt a few things from this project as well about the current state of this particular technology, which I think will be quite interesting to you too. So, introduction over. Let's head over to tomshardware.com. Story here by Zach Killiam. I have attempted to read this headline, by the way, 5 or 6 times by this point, hence I had the intro nailed. And I've tripped over it every time because it is quite wordy. But I will persevere, and hopefully I'm going to manage it this time around. So, designer turns discontinued e-ink dev board into a 60Hz Game Boy handheld. Dual-core chip runs at 100% to power handheld. 960 by 540 display employs ultra-low-cost ESP32 S3 microcontroller. I did it! I'm still not sure what some of that means, but I guess we will learn as we read through the story. So the practicality of the project isn't really the point, right, Zach? It's mostly a fascinating demo of hardware hacking skill, and I totally agree. So we have some stills here from a YouTube video by Wenting Zhang, who is the creator of this project. And just before we continue, I also wanted to acknowledge the name of this thing, the Paperboy. Get it? E-ink, Game Boy, the Paperboy. I really like that. I think that's really clever. Well done. Anyway, enterprising enthusiast Wenting has turned an M5 stack Paper S3 dev kit with an e-ink screen into a more or less fully functional Game Boy. If you're not a hardware hacker yourself, there's a fair chance you've never heard of Wenting Zhang or Modos Labs. The engineer's Wenting channel on YouTube has been a favourite of niche tech nerds for a long time, showcasing all kinds of hardware hacking expertise. Zhang spent the last several years turning that expertise into Modos Labs, a company whose high refresh e-ink displays we've covered before. It won't play real cartridges, and apparently the sound is kind of jank, in Zach's words, and the performance isn't always full speed. Still, quite an achievement for a few reasons. The Paper S3 is an e-ink dev kit, not really a commercial product. It's intended for prototyping and exactly this sort of hardware hacking. And also, this isn't powered by some multi-core rock chip or all-winner SoC. It is powered by an ESP32 microcontroller, which of course you can buy for pennies nowadays, and they're popping up in all sorts of things, including in my new wine fridge, incidentally, that I bought a couple of weeks ago. It has a Wi-Fi interface. And I noticed that it had an open source, like a GPL license attached to it, relating to the ESP32. There you go. And there's another revelation for you. I own a wine fridge. Yeah, YouTubing doing well, paying the big bucks. Anyway. So apparently the creator of this, Wenting Zhang, owns this company, Modos Labs, which sells these e-ink displays. He's not paying me any kind of backhander or anything to give this a shout out, I will say. I should just make that clear, because I have had some speculation in the past. No, people don't want to pay me for this, other than my sponsor and a little tiny bit of ad revenue, I guess. I do it for the love of it, for the love of the game. Anyway, to understand how this Game Boy emulator is even possible, you have to understand Zhang's breakthrough with e-ink hardware, which he originally developed for his open source monitor project, the Modos Flow. There's a whole video explaining the tech, but basically he replaced the display controller with a powerful FPGA so that he could treat every single pixel as an independent display region and then only update the parts of the screen that are actually changing each frame. So yeah, how did he achieve this on the embedded controller in the Paper S3? It's only possible because the Game Boy screen is very low resolution by modern standards. It's 160 by 144 pixels. The screen on the Paper S3 is 960 by 540, so he was able to multiply the resolution by 3 to give him enough room for dithering to reproduce the 4 possible shades of the original Game Boy screen. Clever stuff. And that takes almost the entirety of the second core on the ESP32, leaving just enough room for audio processing while the actual emulation happens on the first CPU core. The end result is a very convincing facsimile of the Game Boy's display, except instead of being a tiny and dim LCD, it's a razor-sharp, crystal clear e-ink display. Let's hit play on this. Zhang even implemented some quality-of-life features, such as partial Bluetooth LE controller support and dedicated quick save and quick load touchscreen buttons to save the emulator's state. And you can even load a state directly from the front end, allowing you to instantly resume where you left off when you have to stop. So there is a bit more information about this, and indeed there is also a YouTube video. Can we skip through? Can we actually see a demo of this thing in action? Where is it? Come on. I want to see this 60 Hz refresh rate in action. The Zelda title screen probably doesn't seem like the best demo of that. There we go. Let's see some gameplay, some Pokemon gameplay here. Yeah, it looks good. It looks smooth and really nice, sharp and clear on that display as well. Because I guess like a lot of us out there, my only experience of e-ink is stuff like the Kindle. I've owned a couple of Kindles and I currently own a Kobo. I've escaped from the Bezos sphere of influence. And, although the Kobo does have a colour screen, it doesn't have a fast refresh rate. It doesn't have a particularly high resolution. So to see what is possible with this technology, regardless and kind of outside of the Game Boy aspect of this story, I also found really interesting because I had no idea that any of this stuff was possible on these kind of e-ink displays. Just goes to show how far the technology has come. But there you go. There is a link, as mentioned, to that down below, as per all the other stories in this week's Ramble. As always, you can go and read all about Wenting Zhang and his e-ink 60 Hz Game Boy device, or if you'd rather consume that in video form, there's also a link to the YouTube video there as well. Really, really cool achievement. I like it a lot. I think it's fair to say that it has been far too long since I reported on the Atari ST here on Rees Rambles, and that's a real shame because this computer, this very computer that I have as part of my studio backdrop here, was one of my first loves and something that set me off on the path of working with computers and indeed having this whole sideline of retro, vintage computing, gaming, YouTubing stuff that I also have going on. So this is my original Atari 520 STE that I got for Christmas 1991. And before that, we had a very short-lived Acorn Electron that blew up. I'm sure you know the story by now if you're a regular listener, but I played on my cousin's 2600 Junior one Christmas. I demanded an Atari from my parents. I want an Atari. And they said no. They said you can't have a games console because you'll sit in your bedroom night after night just playing games and being antisocial. So they bought me a computer, the Atari ST, and yeah, I sat in my bedroom night after night playing games and being antisocial. And I'm sure many of you will find that story very relatable, whether that be on the ST or the Amiga or one of the other fine computers that were around at the time and that inspired many of you to also pursue this hobby and this passion of, fiddling with these old computers well into our middle age. Anyway, a few years ago, I showed off a very cool port of Wolfenstein 3D to the Atari STE. I had that on display at the Kickstart show a few years ago, and it went down an absolute storm. That was running on stock hardware, upgraded to 4 meg, but that's just a case of slotting some 32-pin SIMs in there. And also you do need a hard drive, but again, that's something that was supported back in the day. And it's really, really impressive to see what people are doing with the STE in particular in this day and age, and really kind of unlocking the potential of that hardware, which I think was very underrated and not well supported by developers at the time. But anyway, that's the ST owner's lament. Let's turn to something a bit more positive, which is this rather excellent port of Command & Conquer for the Atari ST. Another game that I have quite a bit of history with. When we got our first PC, incidentally, after the ST, in, I think it was Christmas 94, it wasn't long before I discovered the Command & Conquer games and enjoyed them rather a lot. So we have come full circle, at least as far as I'm concerned. Command & Conquer for Atari ST is the headline here on indiejoe.itch.io. Indiejoe being Jonas Eschenberg, the developer of this rather awesome project. But it is for the STE. I do feel that I should point that out before you get a bit overexcited about that. Now, hopefully my face isn't covering this video when I do the final edit of this, but I will hit play on this little video in the sidebar so you can just have a look at that while I read through this if you are watching this on YouTube. Looks great, very kind of smooth gameplay. This is running on original hardware as well, so yeah, let's read a bit about how Jonas has achieved this and how you can check it out for yourself on your very own STE, or indeed Mega STE in this case, or an STE with an accelerator. But he is working to lower the system requirements as he optimizes this project. And I think that is important to note. So in his own words, this is a work-in-progress port of Westwood's 1995 real-time strategy classic, Command & Conquer, to the Atari ST, a 16-bit computer introduced in 1985. Build and defend your base, harvest Tiberium, fight the enemy and conquer their base in this genre-defining classic. Whether you play on the side of the Global Defense Initiative or the Brotherhood of Nod, a thrilling ride is waiting for you. The original DOS version of Command & Conquer ran on 256 colour VGA graphics. The ST port has to run on 16 colours. Therefore, colour reduction played an important part in this port. If you like the 16-colour aesthetics, Command & Conquer for Atari ST is for you. And we'll just take a look at some of the screenshots here, because we've got the title screen, really well done in 16 colours. You can barely tell that it's been chopped down from the original 256 colours. We've got a loading screen here. I think this is the where you select between GDI and Nod. If you remember this from back in the day, this is where you'd be prompted to change the CD if you had the wrong CD in the drive. We've got some gameplay here. We've got a nice base here. We've got some buildings and some units selected. We can see all the build screen stuff on the right-hand side, looking very nice. Again, a bit more, a bit of a shot of a grassy area with some water and stuff. Another base here. I think that's a Nod base there. Got some screenshots of some intermission screens, loading screens, some stats and things. A map, all complete, all very playable, and even at this very early stage, looking very impressive indeed. He does go on to say that you can donate. You can go to the itch page and download this for free if you like. But if you want to donate, that will encourage him to continue with the project and perhaps see if he can turn his hand to making this into some kind of commercial offering, some kind of, the beginnings of some kind of, a game development studio, I guess, or something, actually porting some interesting games to the platform. And it certainly seems that he's very capable based on this. So that is an option. And of course, I should point that out because I do think that's important. Hardware requirements. The DOS version of Command & Conquer required a 486 class CPU and at least 8 megabytes of RAM. The Atari ST port is slowly lowering these requirements towards an Atari Mega STE with 4 megabytes of RAM. Command & Conquer for Atari ST is also known to work on Atari STE computers that have been upgraded using accelerator cards and on the Falcon. So another game that you can play on the Falcon in addition to the 2 games that are on the Falcon. If you don't care about Atari ST hardware, the best option is to play on an emulator like Atari. So there you go. So at the minute, the minimum requirement is a 16 megahertz, 8 meg 68000, and recommended is a 32 megahertz 68020. 020. Sorry, of course you need the blitter and the DMA sound as provided by the STE. The minimum requirements, you will only get sound effects, but on the accelerated 68020 machine, you will also get music. And there is an experimental build with no audio that runs on a stock 8 MHz 68000 Mega STE with 4 meg of RAM. But as mentioned, this is being optimized and the requirements are hopefully being lowered as time goes on. And there are some issues with that experimental setting. The Atari TT, if you're one of the very few lucky people who own one of those, is not supported because it does not have the blitter chip. much like the original Atari ST, of course, the 1985 model. So to play the game, you need to download the executable game package from the itch page. You also need the original CD images, which of course were released by Westwood a few years ago, or EA, or whoever owns the rights nowadays. So you can go and legitimately and legally download those. Then there's a web-based tool which allows you to build the actual Atari ST version of the game based on those CDs. And of course, we're seeing that quite a lot with some of these ports nowadays as well. It's a protection against copyright takedowns and that kind of thing, not distributing the original assets alongside these ports, which I think is very wise, if a little bit unfortunate. But in this case, it's a web-based tool, so very easy to run. And of course, there are some caveats in here about this being an early build and stuff like that, some issues and things. But yeah, so it started off as a port of the source code of the Command & Conquer Remastered Collection, which was officially released a few years ago by EA. It was then ported onto a community-maintained fork called Vanilla Conquer, and since that's all open source, released under the GPL v3 license, the Atari ST port code is also available as well. So yeah, if you want to take the source code and try tinkering with it, you can also do that. So yeah, this is a port that's has at the confession of the author, and I do think it's important to point this out, has used Cursor, which is one of these AI-driven IDE tools, and also some cross-compilation tools for the M68K. The AI wasn't used for any of the artwork, but apparently it was used to port the software itself and to create tools for dealing with the game's assets, and the conversion tools to convert the graphics. And yeah, also incredibly helpful importing x86 assembly code to 68,000 code. So that is very important, but it does raise an important point as well about some of these very high quality ports to unusual platforms. We've seen some of these recomp projects. There was Animal Crossing, of course, from the GameCube that we saw, now has a native PC port, and there was some controversy around that using these AI-based tools as well. So something that is becoming increasingly prevalent in the kind of the vintage computing world, but still quite a lot of actual manpower involved in putting the pieces together to turn this into a finished and polished product. This is not an endorsement of the underlying technology used to build this project, I will say, but it does look like a very, very good quality port. It's running great already. It is being optimized even further, and I do think that is quite big news for the Atari ST world, and therefore yeah, worth covering here on Rees Rambles. I'd be very interested to hear people's thoughts on that. I always tend to over-explain this particular issue, but I know it is quite a hot topic for quite a lot of people, and quite rightly so as well. Still, we now have Command & Conquer on the Atari STE. So, I kicked off my previous story talking about my experiences playing with my Atari ST in my childhood bedroom, and I do acknowledge that I was very, very lucky to have my own computer as a kid, and of course my own TV as well, of course, in my room. And when I wasn't playing on my Atari ST, that TV was generally being used for, well, watching TV, watching the usual kids stuff, He-Man and Turtles and that kind of thing. But one thing that I did look forward to every Saturday was shows like Going Live and Live and Kicking, with those big kids TV Saturday morning extravaganzas with celebrity guests and silly games and activities and things going on. And one part of that which always really stood out to me, and something that I was desperate to take part in as well as the childhood pro gamer that I was, were these phone-in TV games. And I'm sure you know the sort. I'm going to show you some footage of one actually running here, which was a game called Hugo, where you control this troll character. And this is the specific game that I actually remember most vividly from back in the day. And it's like a 3D third-person platformer type thing, I guess, which in and of itself was quite impressive to see running. But the input method of actually calling in and pressing the buttons on the touch-tone phone and the computer at the other end kind of interpreting those as inputs and using that to control the character absolutely fascinated me. Most kids who phoned in did a really, really atrocious job, and to be honest, I think that was more the limitations of the technology itself. I think there was a bit of a delay, and sometimes the inputs wouldn't be interpreted properly and they'd end up dying and falling off a cliff or whatever, as we've just seen in this video, if you are watching this on YouTube. And every week I begged my parents, can I phone in? I want to play the game on the TV. And quite rightly, I think, in hindsight, they said, no, you're not calling an 0900 number at £1.50 a minute and embarrassing yourself in front of the whole country. So I guess I should thank them for that, at least. But yeah, this is Hugo, and from what I gather, it was popular all over the world as well, particularly in South America and also in its home country of Denmark. There is a documentary about this as well, just before we get into this project, which was released by Kim Justice a couple of years ago. So really quite high-quality documentary covering the history of this game. The few different games, there were actually a couple of other Hugo games as well. Like I say, this is the one that I remember most specifically, the mountaineering game. But apparently there were a few others over the years and in other parts of the world, which was quite interesting to see. So why am I talking about Hugo now? Well, there is a project which has come up on my radar in the past week that allows you to finally enjoy this game from the comfort of your own home. And you can even use a touch-tone phone as the input as well, if you want the full experience. So if we head over to the GitHub page for the project, this is gazalo/Hugo-RE, of course, link down below. You don't need to attempt to type that in yourself. It's Hugo Into the Multiverse, a relive the Hugo experience, reverse engineering and re-implementation of Hugo games, a 1990s TV game. So yeah, we have a screenshot here of Hugo Into the Multiverse. Let's just click on that. Yes, that was definitely worth the effort. It has popped up and it is no bigger than it was when it was embedded in the README. So we'll go back to that. And we can see that this was part of a kids' TV show. What's that? What language is that? And looks like Spanish, I guess. And yeah, let's just work our way through the README. So relive the Hugo TV gaming experience from the 90s. Multiplayer re-implementation of Hugo minigames using the original resources. So we've got the main game, the audio server, the game asset converter, and we have a light version, which is implemented in C. It's a single-player game, ideal for porting to smaller platforms. And you can use a tool called PJSUA, and another tool called asterisk config, which allows you to play with either an actual touch-tone phone, I guess over an audio input, or an IP phone as well, if you like. So this does cite all of its video sources here. So we do have a lot of material that has been captured from TV broadcasts that people did record back in the day. And people have recreated the sprite sheets and things from those. So I don't think this is based on reverse engineering. I don't think that anyone has managed to get hold of one of the original computers running at the TV studios running this game and actually extract any original game code. This is kind of a ground-up re-implementation, reverse engineered from what was kind of seen at the broadcast end, which actually makes it quite the undertaking, I think. There are links to some related projects as well, some other people who have been working on getting these Hugo games released in some form or another. But yeah, this is such a fascinating project and just allowed me to kind of revisit this very nostalgic thing from my past and just see Hugo the Troll in action again. Haven't got it running myself. Looks like it runs on Windows, although I believe it is open source and they are very open to porting to other platforms as well, which would be quite interesting to see. Consists of multiple parts, the audio server, the phone input part, and all of the rest of it, as you would expect. And looks like we have had commits as recently as 2 months ago, so still quite an active project as well. That's Hugo Into the Multiverse, a recreation of a TV gaming classic that I'm sure many of us remember very fondly from our childhoods. And that, my dearest ramblers, brings me around rather neatly to our regular Videos of the Week feature, wherein I either feature videos that I've seen in the past week across YouTube that have entertained, enlightened, educated, or otherwise improve my life in some small way, or videos that have been recommended to me by my Discord community that I haven't actually gotten around to watching yet. And I'm going to make that an official part of the intro to this segment going forward, because that is becoming increasingly the case. There just aren't enough hours in the day to watch all of the fantastic stuff that is out there on YouTube. But I do still want to give these people a platform and give them a bit of promotion, a bit of a leg up as well. So that is how we will continue. But introductions aside, I suppose you're here for the video, so let's get on with that. Now, this one is very relevant indeed to this week's news, all about digital distribution and physical releases, indeed the death of physical releases. It's a talk by Evercade. So you may be familiar with Evercade. They make these rather wonderful handheld consoles and TV consoles, and more importantly, they have regular releases of cartridges where they have officially licensed games from companies, whether they be indie games or indeed kind of older games from the past. Package them up rather nicely in cartridge form, made sure that they're 100% compatible and the performance is running at a very high level on their hardware, and then sell them in rather nice boxes with rather nice manuals and things as well. So if you're looking for a modern day equivalent of the old school cartridge based console experience, you can't go wrong with an Evercade, and they're not paying me to say that either. I am just a big fan of their platform. Now, of course, particularly relevant with this week's news about the death of physical media, as mentioned, because they're still releasing games on cartridge. They don't have any kind of online distribution for their games. So you buy the cartridge, you stick it stick it up on your shelf in the box, and when you want to play the game, you take the cartridge down, you stick it in the console, and you play it. Just like the good old days, and nobody can come into your house and take that away from you. I suppose somebody could probably break into your house and steal them, but you know what I mean. Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo or whoever can't turn those games off remotely and take them away from you after the fact. And I think that is important, of course, important for game preservation as well. Of course, these games are emulated, I will say, but they are emulated very well on a nice platform with some nice modern quality of life improvements and things that allow you to enjoy them on your modern day displays and whatnot. Anyway, this is Sean Cleaver's presentation from Too Many Games 2026, and it is Why Evercade Matters. So it is talking about the importance of Evercade in the world of game preservation, making these games available for people to experience, and I'm totally on board with that message. So I do want to draw some attention to this. This was released a day ago on the Bacon Ice Cream Productions channel, and it is a recording of a live talk with some kind of off-screen captures and things as well. 21 minutes 39. Do go and give that a watch if you are interested in that. And I'm going to take a brief diversion, which is becoming a bit of a theme for this ramble, to take a look at Evercade's post here on Blue Sky, just mocking the whole Sony and Microsoft situation. How to open your new Evercade cart. Open the box, remove the manual, smell the fresh print, and remember that everything will be okay. Very much taking the opportunity to jump on that as a marketing opportunity, and I can't say that I blame them. It did make me chuckle. Anyway, back to the videos. And something unrelated. Oh, this has auto-played in the background. Isn't that unfortunate? Anyway, this is a channel called It's a Pixel Thing, which I hadn't come across before. And it is a bit of a think piece, I guess, a bit of an opinion piece, a bit of a talking head type video, talking about very similar concepts, but this time all around DOS games. And this generation of DOS gamers, we're not getting any younger, and we're not going to be around forever. And, the implications of that, of course, the hardware that are running those games, it also isn't going to be around forever. The implications of that for the future of these games and for future generations. And very well thought out and quite inspirational kind of argument, and also, informational, educational look at the past. Look at that Doom. Shout out to the Doom Shrine. Perfect timing. So yeah, that's a documentary over on It's a Pixel. Well, I say documentary, you know what it is. Over on It's a Pixel Thing. When the DOS generation is gone, we lose more than games. Very well shot, very well edited, and very well thought out. And I thought, very poignant. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, for those of us who grew up during the DOS gaming generation. And it's only 7.5 minutes long, so it won't even take up too much of your time. Next video I have for you, again, why is this stuff all auto-playing in the background? What have they changed in Firefox? Yes, again, on this subject, and I'm hammering this point home. Of course, I opened with this week, and it is very important. And Jeff Geerling has thoughts on this. Jeff is a huge inspiration to me. I love his channel. I love his work ethic. I love the sheer amount of thought and planning and work and stuff that goes into even his second channel as well. His more kind of off-the-cuff stuff as well has been quite a big inspiration to me. A man whose opinions I respect a lot. And he has also made a video this week giving his thoughts on this. If buying isn't owning. And oh yeah, look at that. A nice demo of Jellyfin here for you, which I did give a bit of a cheeky mention to earlier. Also my video platform of choice, because it means that you actually own the files and can have full control over them and can play them forever without anyone being able to take them away from you. More on kind of the movie side than the gaming side, because of course we also had this news of Sony removing people's legitimately purchased movies from their PlayStation consoles, up to 550 in total. And Jeff's kind of take on that kind of aspect of the preservation side of things. 5 minutes and 15 seconds. And again, another video on this topic that I think is worth a watch for a kind of a good kind of well-rounded picture on the horrible upcoming death of physical media. Next video, again, we're going to have to hit play on this. Now, I haven't actually watched this video, I will say. This is something that came up on my Discord this week, just relating to all of the talk around the Commodore phone, the phone that I've been reporting on. Of course, this Sailfish OS-based flip phone, kind of a smartphone, kind of being marketed as a dumb phone, doesn't support some apps, some by design, social media, that kind of thing. Quite an interesting take. Of course, there's been a lot of debate about the price, which they have reduced. A lot of debate about it being just a white label, off-the-shelf Chinese cheapo phone, which they have also addressed and pointed out that they did design it themselves in-house from scratch, which of course I did talk about last week. But this is an alternative to that in a slightly different format. And it's called the Clicks Communicator, and it is designed specifically around communication and facilitating that. And it is closer to kind of the old BlackBerry format of phone. So it has this lovely physical QWERTY keyboard, this two-thumb kind of operated QWERTY keyboard. It's got a lovely big colour screen on it. It's got a couple of cameras on it, as you would expect from a modern-day phone. That's all I can tell you right now from watching this video without the sound on. Like I say, I haven't watched this. I'm not familiar with this product, and this is not an endorsement of this product. But I did think it was a very interesting offering, and someone did bring it up in my Discord server earlier this week. So I thought that was worth a look. And the date on this video is the 30th of June as well. People here talking about the Palm Pre and the BlackBerry, of course. There's an SD card slot, so you can add extra memory to it. 3.5mm audio jack, and reminiscing about HTC phones and stuff as well. So quite an interesting looking product, and one that I do intend to take a bit more of a look into. But I thought that was worth mentioning in the context of the Commodore phone. And finally, that's on the Clicks YouTube channel, by the way, and it is 6 minutes and 25 seconds long. And finally, we have, so this is an ongoing project on a channel called, I'm going to butcher this, I've not actually watched this video and I'm not familiar with this project, but a channel called Luxocrates, or is it Luxocrates? Shall we go with the ancient Greek pronunciation of that? Does sound very classy, doesn't it? Let's say Luxocrates. And this is a very, from what I've seen of this video, and I have had a quick skim through it, it is a very, very well produced video of an ongoing project to do with porting Commando from the Commodore 64 to arcade hardware, and more specifically looking at taking the very impressive SID music that Rob Hubbard composed for that game back in the day on the Commodore 64, of course a machine well known for its SID sound chip and the excellent quality music on that system. And it's an ongoing effort to port that to arcade hardware, which is one of these weird and wonderful retro gaming projects that we see crop up. And of course, I've talked about a few in this ramble, but again, I just love stuff like this. And I'm going to have to actually, in fact, I'm going to subscribe to this. I do have this in my watch later list to check out, but it is part of a series on this ongoing project, as mentioned. It's 50 minutes and 40 seconds long, so this is very much a stick it on your TV in the evening kind of project, but very much a deep dive into how the music actually worked, how it was put together, and indeed the process to convert that. So really, really deep dive, technically impressive video from this channel. The channel does have 3,880 subscribers at the moment, and it is very difficult, I've talked about this in the past, very difficult to grow a channel on YouTube, particularly people who are I think it's quite criminal that people are putting such a huge amount of work into videos and not getting the reach and getting the platform that I think that they deserve. And having been there myself over the past few years, I think it is important to support these projects. So, that's how Rob Hubbard's C64 music player worked in the context of converting that to the arcade platform. And just looks like a very well-made video. Haven't had the time to sit down and watch this properly, but I do trust my community. They're a bunch of good eggs and they're very smart people. What I should be doing is making a note of who's actually recommended these. I'll do that next time. I know James Encott and Steve's Tech Shed are the usual names, people like Manemo, we've got Katrina, we've got Sozzled, we've got Suze, we've got all the usual people. I used to read out a list at the end of every ramble, and I've forgotten to do that again. Anyway, we can't go back now. We are at the end of this week's Ramble, so thank you ever so much for joining me. And of course, a big, big thank you to my community as well for contributing some of those stories and some of those videos for the Ramble this week. As always, great community over there. You can go and check them out and you can come and join us using the link down below in the description if you are watching this on YouTube, and also in the show notes if you are listening to this on your podcast platform of choice. And speaking of said links, of course, if there is anything that has piqued your interest as part of this week's Ramble, you can find the links to all of my stories in that place as well. But that's all I have for you. As mentioned, these go out every single week at 2 minutes to midnight UK time on my second YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rees Rambles, and also on the podcast platforms as well. But if you are watching this or listening to this, you probably already know that. Thank you ever so much for joining me once more. I do enjoy putting these together for you every week, and it is fascinating to keep up to date with everything else that is going on out in the retro world. Well, I do have quite a bit going on in my personal life as well. So thank you to you for helping me as well to kind of keep my my toe in with all the retro and vintage happenings. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Thanks again, and goodbye.